Diego Morales wiped the sweat from his brow, the Texas sun blazing like an open furnace above the garage. The desert heat shimmered off the cracked asphalt, and the smell of oil and dust clung to the air. His shop, a modest one-bay garage on the outskirts of town, stood as the last honest stop for miles. Most days were slow, but Diego preferred it that way. Simple, steady, predictable. The rival shop across town, flashy and suspiciously cheap, had been draining his customers for months. As he tightened the last bolt on a rusted sedan, Diego leaned back and sighed, his hands coated in grease. He glanced at the calendar taped to the wall, each day crossed out like a prisoner counting time. Business wasn't great, but at least he had his integrity. He thought about the Salinas brothers' shop, shiny glass windows, polished trucks, always packed. Too good to be true, he muttered. Too good and too dangerous to question. A cicada's steady drone filled the silence until it was broken by the strained cough of an engine. Diego turned toward the road and spotted a massive 18-wheeler, steam hissing from under the hood. The truck groaned to a halt in front of his garage, tires crunching gravel as the driver hopped out. She was young, dust-streaked, and carried herself like someone used to being underestimated. "Radiators shot," she said, tugging her cap lower against the sun. Her voice was firm, but her eyes betrayed urgency. Diego nodded, motioning her to back the rig into the bay. The smell of burnt coolant hit him hard, mixing with the desert heat. Another job, another stranger, another long afternoon. Or so he thought. When it came time to settle the bill, she hesitated, her hands digging nervously into her pockets. "I don't have the money," she admitted, bracing for his anger. Diego's jaw tightened, irritation rising, until she leaned closer and whispered, "But I've got something better, information." He frowned. This was no ordinary customer. Diego crossed his arms, skeptical. "Information doesn't pay bills." But the way she said it, sharp, deliberate, like every word carried weight, made him pause. The woman introduced herself as Elena Herrera, a trucker with nowhere else to turn. "My rig won't make another mile without your help," she said, "and I can't let what I've got fall into the wrong hands." Her voice trembled at the edges, but her resolve was steel. From her duffel bag, Eleanor pulled out a worn leather notebook, edges frayed, pages crowded with numbers and codes. She slid it across the workbench. "Those guys across town, the ones running you out of business? They're not making money off better prices. They're laundering cartel cash. Here's the proof." Diego stared at the book, his pulse quickening. He didn't want trouble, but trouble had just walked into his shop. "Lady, you don't know what you're asking," he muttered. He thought about the Salinas brothers, about their connections and the whispers around town. People who poked into their business didn't last long. Elena met his gaze, unwavering. "I know exactly what I'm asking. Help me, and this doesn't just fix my truck. It helps stop them." For a moment, Diego felt the weight of something bigger than himself pressing down. The hiss of the radiator pulled him back. Fixing the truck was the easy part. What came after? That was the storm. Diego agreed reluctantly, his stomach twisting with unease. He grabbed his tools and went to work, each turn of the wrench echoing like a decision he couldn't take back. The sun dropped lower, painting the sky in shades of blood red, as if warning him of what lay ahead. By the time the rig was patched and ready, Diego had made his choice. He tucked the notebook under his arm, its weight heavier than any wrench. "You'd better hope this is worth it," he told her. Elena gave a thin smile, equal parts gratitude and burden. "Trust me, it's worth more than you think." The desert wind howled through the open garage doors, carrying with it the first hint of danger. The notebook sat on Diego's workbench like a live wire, daring him to open it. The leather cover was cracked, stained with grease and sweat, as if it had survived too many close calls. He hesitated, then flipped it open under the dim light of a hanging bulb. Columns of numbers, names, dates, coded entries that hinted at millions moving through fake invoices and shell accounts. He recognized one name, Salinas Auto, his rival shop. His gut clenched. Elena leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching his reaction. "Now you see why I can't just throw cash at you." Her tone was edged with defiance, but beneath it lay exhaustion. Diego rubbed his forehead, closing the book. "You don't get it. This isn't just dirty money. These guys own half the town. They've got judges, cops, inspectors all in their pocket. If they know I have this—" He stopped. The thought was too dangerous to finish. She stepped closer, voice lowering. "I know what I'm asking. I'm asking because you're not like them. You fix what's broken. This is just another repair, only bigger." Diego looked at her, searching her face for cracks, but her eyes, sharp, tired, desperate, held steady. She wasn't bluffing. The silence stretched, filled only by the creak of metal cooling from the day's heat. Diego finally exhaled, a sound halfway between surrender and acceptance. "All right, but you fix your truck and disappear. I want no part in this." Eleanor's faint smile didn't reach her eyes. It's never that simple. That night, Diego couldn't sleep. The desert outside buzzed with cicadas, but inside his chest was a storm. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the notebook, the numbers, the name Salinas. He had taken her deal, whether he admitted it or not. And in the morning, the price of that bargain would come knocking. The knock came just after sunrise, sharp and insistent, echoing through the garage. Diego's stomach dropped. He opened the door to find two men in suits, clean, pressed, out of place against the dusty street. Badges flashed. Federal agents. "We're looking for someone," the taller one said. "Elena Herrera, or maybe she goes by another name." Diego's grip tightened on the doorframe. His mind raced. Elena had left before dawn, saying she had errands and would be back. He forced his voice steady. "Had a trucker come by yesterday, but she's gone." The shorter agent studied him like a puzzle, eyes narrowing. "If she comes back, you call us, for your own good." They handed him a card and left as suddenly as they arrived, dust swirling in their wake. Diego locked the door behind them and slumped against it, pulse hammering. The notebook sat hidden beneath a toolbox. If the feds wanted her under another name, who exactly was Elena? Criminal, informant, or something in between? He was in deeper than he thought. That evening, Elena returned, dust on her boots, eyes darting. Diego cornered her before she could speak. "Federal agents were here, looking for you. Only they didn't use your name." She froze, then exhaled slowly. "I knew they'd come." Her tone was flat, resigned. "I'll explain, but you won't like it." Diego's hand shook as he pointed to the notebook. "Start talking. Who the hell are you really? Because whatever this is, it's not just a broken radiator anymore." The hum of her truck's engine filled the silence, low and uneasy. Finally, Eleanor met his gaze. "I was one of them, until I wasn't." And with those words, the walls of Diego's world began to crack. The garage lay silent under a single, flickering bulb, shadows stretching across the walls. Diego stood stiff, arms folded, staring at the woman who had turned his life upside down. Elena sat on a stool, her shoulders heavy, her face drawn. She knew she owed him the truth. The desert wind rattled the windows as tension grew. She rubbed her hands together as if trying to wash off invisible stains. "I worked for them," she admitted finally, her voice trembling. "The Salinas brothers. I kept their books. I tracked payments, trucks, drop-offs." Diego's breath hitched, anger flashing. She raised her chin, defiant but broken. "I didn't see the blood behind the numbers." Her gaze dropped to the floor, words spilling like confession in a church. "Then I found out the couriers weren't just trucks. They were kids. Kids forced to carry packages across the border. My sister was next in line. Her voice cracked, and the truth hung in the air like smoke. The weight of it pressed into Diego's chest. He turned, gripping the edge of the workbench until his knuckles whitened. "So you ran?" he asked, bitterness lacing every syllable. Elena's voice steadied, though her eyes shimmered with pain. "No, I flipped. I started passing intel to federal agents. Some I trusted, some I couldn't. That's why I needed you. A clean outsider." Her breath shook as she finished. Diego shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. He had spent years keeping clear of trouble, minding only his work. Now, trouble sat in his garage wearing a trucker's jacket. "You should have kept driving," he muttered. Elena leaned forward, voice fierce. "And leave my sister. Leave those kids. You think I could live with that?" Her defiance cracked his wall of indifference. The silence between them thickened, broken only by the faint tick of cooling metal. Diego saw her differently now, not just a desperate trucker, but a fighter carrying scars. Yet he felt the danger wrapping tighter around them. If she spoke true, they were already marked. The Salinas brothers wouldn't forgive betrayal. The notebook was both weapon and curse. Elena's eyes glistened, but her resolve hardened. "I didn't come here to beg. I came because I believe you're not like them." Diego wanted to scoff, but her words stirred something buried deep. Once he had dreamed of fighting injustice. Years of fear had dulled him, turned his fight into survival. Now, Elena's fire threatened to reignite it. He leaned on the bench, torn between fear and duty. "You've tied me into this whether I want it or not," he said quietly. "If they come, it won't just be you they're after." Elena's lips curved into a sad smile. "That's the cost of truth. But we don't run from it. We drive straight through." Her courage struck him harder than her confession. Diego exhaled, the weight of choice pressing like the heat outside. He could kick her out, burn the notebook, pretend none of it ever happened. But he knew better. Neutrality was a lie, and silence was complicity. The line had already been drawn. Whether he wanted or not, he was standing on her side. That realization terrified him. The night grew deeper, shadows longer, silence heavier. For Diego, the garage felt less like a workshop and more like a battlefield waiting to ignite. Elena had spoken her truth, and now it lived between them. He couldn't unhear it, couldn't unsee the fire in her eyes. Tomorrow would bring danger, of that he was certain, and he no longer had the luxury of choice. At sunrise, Diego found a black SUV parked across the street, its engine idling quietly. The windows were tinted, the presence deliberate. He told himself it was coincidence, but the knot in his stomach said otherwise. As the day dragged on, two men appeared near the lot. They smoked, laughed, but their eyes never left the garage. Diego kept his head down, but his hands shook as he worked. By noon, 3 customers had cancelled their appointments. The excuses were weak, mumbled over static-filled phone calls. Diego understood the message. The Salinas brothers had spread the word, "Do business with him, and you'd regret it." His once steady stream of work had dried like the desert soil. Fear had a way of starving a man before bullets ever reached him. That evening, Diego closed the garage late, fatigue heavy on his shoulders. As he turned to lock the door, his heart stopped. Red paint streaked across the metal shutter, letters dripping bold and violent. "Stay out." The warning screamed louder than any gunshot. His fists clenched around the rag in his hand, fury burning through the fear. Elena returned from scouting the back roads, dust clinging to her boots. Her eyes widened as she saw the paint. She stepped closer, tracing the words with her gaze. "They know you have it," she whispered, voice low and urgent. "The notebook. They're letting you know you're marked." Diego didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than words. Don Esteban shuffled across the lot, his cane striking the ground with sharp rhythm. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were alert, sharp as broken glass. "They've noticed you, mijo," he said, voice low. "And once they notice, there's no turning back." Diego tried to protest, but Esteban cut him off. "Your name's already on their list. You think neutrality will save you? It won't." The old man's words struck deep, truth disguised as warning. Diego had spent years dodging conflict, convincing himself survival meant silence. But now silence painted his shop in red letters. He looked at Elena, standing tall despite the threat. Her presence was both a curse and a spark. She had dragged him into the fire, but she also showed him a way through it. Inside the garage, Diego tried to scrub the paint from the shutter. His arms ached, but the letters wouldn't fade. Elena watched him, fists clenched at her sides. "You can't erase this," she said softly. "You can only answer it." Her voice carried no fear, only certainty. She had been living in the shadow of this threat far longer than he had. Diego dropped the rag, sweat dripping from his brow. He turned to her, frustration boiling. "I never asked for this," he snapped. Elena's eyes blazed. "Neither did those kids, neither did my sister, but it's ours now. You fix what's broken, Diego, and right now this town is broken." Her words left no room for retreat. He stood there, caught between anger and admiration, watching her courage burn against the night. For all her flaws, Elena carried strength he couldn't ignore. She wasn't running, and deep down, he knew he couldn't either. The battle had already reached his doorstep, and pretending otherwise would only hasten his downfall. The desert air grew heavy, the stars sharp against the black sky. The words on the shutter glistened under the moonlight, a scar Diego couldn't erase. Neutrality was gone. The threats had begun, and tomorrow he would have to choose whether to cower or fight. The decision loomed as inevitable as the rising sun. The following morning, Diego arrived at his garage to find the black SUV gone, but the silence felt heavier. He worked in tense rhythm, every sound magnified, every shadow suspicious. Elena leaned against the doorway, watching him with quiet intensity. They didn't need to speak. Both knew the game had shifted. The Salinas brothers were circling closer. As the day dragged on, Don Esteban returned, his cane tapping against the cracked pavement. He shook his head slowly, his voice a whisper meant only for Diego. "I've seen this before. Once they paint your name, you're marked. You either fight back or get buried." Diego swallowed hard, realizing neutrality was dead. The choice had already been made for him. That evening, Diego sat alone at his kitchen table, the notebook spread open beneath the dull light. The numbers blurred together, forming chains that bound him tighter with every glance. He thought of his father, a man who had chosen silence over justice, and how that silence had cost their family everything. Diego swore he wouldn't repeat the same mistake. Elena broke the quiet, stepping into the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee. Her eyes searched his face, reading his turmoil. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said gently. Diego let out a bitter laugh. "Don't I? You brought this to my door." She didn't flinch, only sipped her coffee. "Maybe because you were the one man I thought wouldn't look away." The conversation cut him deeper than he expected. He realized she wasn't appealing to duty, but to something buried in his soul. Diego had built a life on avoiding battles, but perhaps his whole existence had been leading to this moment. For the first time, he considered fighting not for survival, but for justice. It terrified him, and yet it felt right. When night fell, Diego locked the garage doors with care, every click echoing like preparation for war. He looked out at the empty street, the desert wind carrying whispers of danger. Elena sat nearby, her notebook close, her eyes distant. Between them, silence stretched like a fragile truce. The question was no longer if they'd fight, but how. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by the sound of engines and the flash of headlights. Diego woke before dawn, sweat dampening his shirt, and knew he couldn't keep running from the decision. He was already in too deep. The threats were no longer shadows. They were footsteps drawing closer. Tomorrow, neutrality would bury him if he clung to it. The next morning, he found Elena outside, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's time," she said simply, her voice steady. Diego nodded, feeling both dread and resolve tightening in his chest. He had spent his life avoiding battles, but now he saw no other road. They stood side by side, silent but aligned, bound by a fight larger than themselves. Don Esteban watched from his porch, his expression unreadable. He tapped his cane once, a sound sharp as a gavel. "So you've chosen," he muttered, almost to himself. Diego glanced his way and gave a small nod. It wasn't a choice made lightly, but it was the only one left. He would fight. He would no longer turn away. The desert sun climbed higher, searing and merciless, as if bearing witness to Diego's silent vow. He didn't know how long he could stand against the Salinas brothers, or how deep their reach extended. But he knew one thing with clarity. He would not stand down. The point of no return had arrived, and there was no going back. By mid-morning, Diego and Elena spread the notebook's contents across the workbench. Pages covered in numbers and codes lined the surface, like puzzle pieces waiting to connect. Elena traced her finger along one line, whispering names under her breath. These aren't just shell companies. These are judges, cops, local officials. Diego's gut tightened. The cancer ran deeper than he imagined. "We can't hand this to just anyone," Elena said firmly, her voice edged with fear. "Some of the feds are clean, but some are compromised. If we slip up, this all disappears." Diego nodded grimly, staring at the map pinned on the wall. "Then we go around them, straight to someone higher, someone outside this mess." His mind was already racing. Elena leaned closer, tapping a spot on the map. "San Antonio, Assistant U.S. Attorney Howard. I've heard whispers. He's clean. If we can get the files to him, it might stick." Diego studied the route, miles of highways and way stations between them and safety. "They'll expect us on the main road," he said. "So we take the back roads." His voice carried quiet certainty. The plan took shape like a fragile machine, every gear needing to fit perfectly. They would split up, traveling in staggered paths to throw off pursuit. Elena would carry the main notebook. Diego would carry copies hidden in his toolbox. If one of them was caught, the other would still have a chance. It was risky, but risk was their only option. Elena's expression softened as she looked at him. "You don't have to do this. This isn't your fight." Diego met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "It became my fight the moment they painted my shop, the moment they used kids. You're not alone in this." For the first time, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "Then we ride together." Don Esteban shuffled into the garage, listening quietly before speaking. "You'll need more than courage. They'll watch the highways, the checkpoints, the way stations. You'll need tricks, old ones. I can show you." His weathered face betrayed a glimmer of pride, as if seeing Diego rise sparked something long dormant in him. Diego listened, absorbing every word. As the old man spoke, Diego felt the weight of history pressing in, generations of men who had chosen silence, fear, or complicity. He realized he stood at a crossroads, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been crushed under the Salinas brothers' thumb. This wasn't only about survival, it was about legacy. The afternoon was spent prepping the truck, tools scattered across the floor. Diego worked with meticulous precision, rigging compartments and tuning the engine for endurance. Elena packed her duffel with care, every item chosen with purpose. Between them, tension gave way to focus. They were no longer strangers bound by chance. They were allies preparing for war. By sunset, the plan was locked in. 2 routes, 1 destination, no turning back. Eleanor stood by the rig, her hand resting on the door, eyes shadowed with determination. "Once we start, there's no stopping," she said quietly. Diego tightened the last bolt, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good. I'm done stopping." The desert wind howled like an omen, carrying their resolve into the night. As darkness settled, the garage lights flickered out. Diego and Elena stood side by side, their silhouettes framed against the dying glow of the horizon. Tomorrow they would drive into the jaws of danger, armed only with evidence and conviction. The plan was fragile, the risks immense, but their will was unshakable. For the first time, Diego felt ready. The morning sun burned over the horizon as Diego tightened the last strap on his truck. The toolbox sat heavy in the back, its hidden compartment filled with copies of Elena's notebook. Across the lot, Elena climbed into her rig, her posture steady, though her eyes betrayed nerves. They exchanged a brief nod, unspoken agreement binding them tighter than words. They rolled out separately, engines roaring against the silence of dawn. Diego took a winding dirt road heading north, dust clouds trailing like ghosts. Elena aimed her rig toward the service highways, blending with other freight carriers. Each bump, each mile marker felt loaded with danger. Behind them, unseen eyes surely tracked their every move. The desert stretched endless, a hostile witness to their gamble. At the first way station, Diego slowed, heart pounding. 2 troopers stood nearby, one yawning, the other scanning trucks with too much interest. He gripped the wheel tighter, praying his forged logbook looked convincing. The trooper glanced his way, then waved him through without question. Relief flooded him, but he knew luck couldn't last forever. Elena's journey proved no easier. Her CB crackled with chatter, truckers swapping warnings of checkpoints up ahead. She adjusted her route, veering toward abandoned service roads. The rig shook over potholes, but she pressed on, eyes darting to every mirror. Every shadow felt like pursuit. Every distant engine rumbled like a threat. Still, she kept moving. By midday, both had slipped through 2 checkpoints. Their nerves stretched thin. The roads grew narrower, the landscape harsher, the silence heavier. Diego thought of the prosecutor in San Antonio, the thin thread of hope pulling him forward. He thought of Elena's sister, a face he hadn't seen but couldn't shake. Their fight wasn't abstract anymore, it was painfully human. As evening approached, Diego stopped at a roadside diner, its neon sign flickering weakly. He ate quickly, eyes scanning the room for danger. A man in a leather jacket watched him too long, then vanished into the restroom. Diego left without finishing his meal, his stomach knotted. The road ahead offered no comfort, only uncertainty. Elena parked at a deserted truck stop. Fatigue weighing on her, she leaned against the wheel, whispering a quiet prayer for strength. In the glove compartment lay a photo of her sister, smiling in innocence. Elena touched the picture gently, promising herself she'd see that smile again free of fear. Her resolve hardened like steel. Back on the road, the night deepened, stars sharp against the black sky. Diego tuned his radio low, the static a strange comfort. His mind replayed Elena's words, "This town is broken. You fix what's broken." He had never thought of himself as a fighter, but now the fight defined him. The desert wind howled like approval. Their separate paths wound through darkness, their lights carving thin beams into the void. They were alone, yet not alone, tethered by the mission, by the evidence, by a shared burden. Neither spoke, but both knew the same truth. They weren't just carrying papers, they were carrying the fate of children, of justice, of their own redemption. By midnight, fatigue clawed at Diego's eyes, but he kept driving. The back roads twisted like veins across the desert, each turn pulling him deeper into danger. Somewhere out there, Elena drove too, her resolve as sharp as his fear. Tomorrow would bring the first true test. Tonight, all they could do was endure. The storm was coming, The sun had barely risen when Diego spotted the dust cloud in his rearview mirror. A black SUV, its engine roaring, closing fast. His pulse spiked, sweat beading on his brow. He pressed the accelerator, his truck rattling under the strain. The road narrowed, dirt spraying behind him. This was no coincidence. The chase had begun. The SUV pulled closer, its tinted windows reflecting the glare of morning light. Diego's mind raced, searching for an escape. He spotted a narrow farm track cutting off the road and yanked the wheel hard. The truck jolted violently, tools clattering in the back. The SUV overshot, tires screeching as it swung to follow. Dust choked the air, blinding him. Diego's mechanic instincts sparked. He reached under the dash, pulling a jury-rig switch he'd installed the night before. A cloud of oil mist sprayed from a hidden valve, coating the ground behind him. The SUV's tires skidded, fishtailing wildly before slamming into a ditch. Diego exhaled sharply, hands trembling. One danger evaded, but the message was clear. They were being hunted. Meanwhile, Eleanor faced her own trial. 2 pickup trucks boxed her in on a lonely stretch of highway, their drivers shouting threats through the windows. Her rig shook as one clipped her trailer, sparks flashing. She gritted her teeth, gripping the wheel with iron focus. Panic threatened, but resolve steadied her. She had driven through storms before. This was just another storm. She downshifted hard, slamming the rig against one truck's fender. The metal screamed, sparks flying as the smaller vehicle veered off the road. The second truck pressed harder, but Elena swung wide, forcing it onto gravel. It skidded, then spun out in a shower of dust. Her heart raced, but she kept her foot steady. The road cleared, but danger still lingered. Diego slowed at a remote gas station, his hands still shaking. He checked the toolbox, ensuring the copies were intact. His reflection in the dirty window startled him. Eyes hardened, jaw set, fear buried under determination. He barely recognized himself. The man in the glass looked like someone preparing for war. Elena pulled into a hidden lot hours later, her knuckles white from gripping the wheel. She checked her trailer, the rig battered but intact. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. She leaned back, drawing long breaths, trying to calm the storm raging inside her chest. Then she smiled faintly, fierce and defiant. They had failed to stop her. Night fell heavy, but the road stayed alive with threat. Engines echoed in the distance, headlights flared like hunting eyes. Diego kept driving, his mind replaying every move, every escape. He realized now that surviving wasn't enough. They had to finish this, no matter the cost. Otherwise, the Salinas brothers would crush them. Elena's voice crackled through the CB, calm but urgent. "We made it through today. Tomorrow won't be easier. Stay sharp." Diego nodded to himself, gripping the wheel tighter. Their enemies had tested them, but they had endured. The first ambush was only a warning. The war was just beginning. As midnight approached, both trucks moved separately but in sync, 2 shadows across the desert. They were hunted, marked, and outnumbered. But for the first time, Diego felt something unexpected rising in his chest. Not just fear, but hope. Together, they could survive this storm. Together, they could win. Diego reached the city edge at dusk, the skyline simmering in heat. He parked beneath a busted streetlight, engine ticking to silence. A sedan idled across the lot, windows dark as a shut-eye. Eleanor's rig rolled past, never slowing, never signaling intent. They were close now, and every move had to land clean. A text buzzed. A time, a door, a single word. Doc. Diego slipped the copies beneath the toolbox false floor. He checked the alley, counting shadows like unpaid debts. Footsteps echoed, then a badge flashed in cheap neon. "Agent Ruiz," the man said, smile tight as a snare. "Howard sent me," Ruiz added, voice smooth, eyes hungry. "Hand it over and we'll keep you off the paperwork." Diego's stomach knotted. The cadence felt rehearsed. "Howard wants face-to-face," he said, buying seconds. Ruiz's grin thinned, patience fraying at the edges. Elena's CB rasped softly in Diego's pocket, coded click. He angled his body, letting the alley's dark swallow his hands. "Paper first," Ruiz pressed, palm open like a threat. Diego coughed, stalling, finger grazing the panic switch. A siren wailed somewhere far, or maybe only in his head. Tires whispered behind them. Another sedan slid in slow. Two silhouettes stepped out, suits ironed, smiles dull. "Howard's busy," one said, voice lacquered in authority. Diego read the seams, shoes too shiny, timing too neat. Compromised, he thought, and the word burned like acid. Ruiz reached for the toolbox, impatience snapping wide. Diego let the lid rise, revealing harmless sockets and rags. "What is this?" Ruiz snapped, anger finally showing teeth. "Just tools," Diego said, heartbeat drumming for escape. The real copies sat taped beneath the truck's crossmember. A flash of headlights washed the alley in white steel. A third car nosed in, doors cracking open like knuckles. Eleanor stepped from the darkness, chin leveled and calm. Her hands were empty, but her stare carried weight. "Gentlemen, you're early," she said, tone razor-thin. Ruiz pivoted, calculation flickering too late in his eyes. Elena's gaze never left him, voice dropping a notch. "Tell me which one of you sold kids for a bonus." Silence pooled, then a nervous laugh spilled cheap. The alley felt smaller, the air thicker, the end nearer. Diego rolled the jack one click, metal whispering below. He pulled a wrench, casual as breathing, ready to swing. Ruiz stepped closer, hand grazing the holster's lip. "Last chance," he said, and the night held its breath. Diego met Elena's eyes. Now or never, no in-between. From the street, a horn blared twice. Don Esteban's beat-up truck. The sound snapped the tension, turned heads just enough. Diego kicked the jack, toolbox sliding into Ruiz's shins. Metal roared, curses flew, and the alley exploded alive. They ran, every step a verdict against corrupted law. They cut through backstreets, engines howling like hunted dogs. Elena took the lead, rig surging past shadowed storefronts. Diego followed tight, bumper kissing the slipstream. Behind them, sirens braided with low, predatory engines. San Antonio's lights shimmered like a dare on the horizon. The courthouse complex loomed, glass hard as a promise. They split at the roundabout, never breaking throttle. Elena peeled toward the loading bays, silent and stark. Diego swung wide, aiming for the underground ramp. 2 routes, 1 target, no room left for hesitation. A security arm dropped like a guillotine across Diego's hood. He flashed the badge card Elena had lifted days ago. The guard squinted, then waved him through with a shrug. Diego slid into shadow, heart knocking like a bad piston. He parked, killed the lights, and grabbed the taped bundle. Up top, Elena braked at Bay C, air brakes hissing. She hopped down, duffel tight to her ribs, eyes everywhere. A woman in a navy blazer stepped out, posture steady. "AUSA Howard's chief," she said, tone clipped precise. "Inside, now. We're officially off the local grid." Corridors hummed with late-night fluorescence and secrets. Diego took a service elevator that smelled of bleach. He checked the vents, the corners, the camera's blind arc. Every sense screamed for flight, but purpose held firm. At the end of the hall, a door marked SIF glowed red. Howard waited, sleeves rolled, tie loosened by war. His eyes were tired in the way honest men get tired. "Close the door," he said, voice carrying courtroom steel. Elena set the duffel down, zipper whispering open. Ledger, roots, burner trees, names, all of it. They laid the files out like organs on cold metal. Diego spread the copies, neat as a service manual. Howard read fast, jaw tightening at the children's roots. He looked up once, anger clean and useful in his gaze. "This moves tonight. No press, no leaks, no mercy." Outside, a commotion rippled. A badge, a shouted name. Howard's chief keyed the intercom, voice slicing calm. 2 agents at the desk claim reassignment authority. Howard's mouth thinned. He didn't bother to swear. Activate internal hold. Nobody in, nobody out. Elena stepped forward, palms open, choice already made. You'll get everything, but I want protection for my sister. Done, Howard said, like a verdict he'd been waiting for. And you? He asked, eyes shifting toward Diego. Diego swallowed, then nodded once. Put me on record. The printer spat warrants like lightning finding ground. Phones lit up, a quiet storm leaping jurisdictional fences. Howard signed, stamped, and sent the city to war. He turned back to them, voice dropping to human. This won't end clean, but it will end. Hold your line. Elena exhaled, the kind that empties a lifetime of fear. Diego glanced at her, saw steel where doubt once lived. In the distance, sirens refracted into something righteous. The truth was no longer theirs to carry alone. They had delivered it, and the machine had begun to move. The conference room smelled of ink and nerves as the warrants printed. Howard's pen scratched signatures like a drumbeat of justice. Diego stood in the corner, hands clenched, watching history move. Elena sat across from the prosecutor, posture rigid, eyes distant. She looked less like a trucker and more like a soldier surrendering. Howard slid the agreement across the table, voice even. Cooperation buys leniency. Testimony buys protection for your sister. Elena's hands trembled only once before she signed. The ink sealed her choice, heavier than any chain. She had delivered the truth. Now the price was her freedom. Diego stepped forward, protest caught in his throat. Elena, you don't have to. She cut him off, firm. I do. They'll never stop hunting me, but my sister, she'll be safe. Her words carried resignation sharpened by courage. Diego's chest tightened, fury clashing with helplessness. 2 marshals entered, cuffs glinting under fluorescent light. Elena rose gracefully, wrists extended without flinching. Her eyes met Diego's, steady and unbroken. Fix the town, Morales. Keep fixing what's broken. The clink of steel echoed like a verdict. As they led her away, Diego's heart cracked. He wanted to fight, to tear the deal apart. But the fire in her gaze told him this was chosen. Her sacrifice was not defeat. It was strategy. She had traded her freedom for a chance at hope. Howard placed a hand on Diego's shoulder, voice grave. She's braver than most men I've met in this job. Diego nodded numbly, fists trembling with restrained rage. Outside, sirens wailed in chorus with the storm of arrests. Justice was moving, but it came chained in sacrifice. That night Diego sat in his garage alone, silence crushing. The empty stool by his desk stared at him like a wound. He replayed her last words again and again. Fix the town. Fix what's broken. Don't look away. He vowed to honor them, no matter the cost. The morning news broke like a thunderclap across Texas. Headlines screamed of raids, seizures, and high-profile arrests. The Salinas brothers, faces once untouchable, now mugshots. Judges, troopers, and city officials paraded in cuffs. The town buzzed with shock, disbelief, and raw vindication. Diego's garage filled with whispers instead of customers. Neighbors lingered, offering thanks in cautious tones. Don Esteban sat on his porch, cane tapping approval. "The tide's turning, mijo," he said, eyes wet with pride. But Diego knew tides always threatened to turn back. The rival shop across town shuttered overnight, windows dark. Graffiti sprawled across its walls. Thieves exposed. Diego drove past slowly, heart pounding at the sight. For the first time in years, his garage felt alive, but victory carried the bitter taste of absence. Letters arrived weekly, stamped with prison seals. Elena's handwriting scrawled steady, stubborn, unbroken. She wrote of resilience, of her sister's safety secured. She asked about the garage, about Don Esteban's health. Each letter burned like comfort and knife together. At night, Diego kept her stool empty by the desk. He imagined her leaning there, boots dusty, eyes fierce. The silence was sharp, but it carried her ghost. He answered every letter, ink blotting into weary paper. Hope stitched between sentences, thin but unyielding. The town shifted slowly, corruption's grip weakened but alive. New officials swore oaths, watched by eyes less trusting. Diego fixed trucks by day, guarded memories by night. The work kept his hands busy, his mind steady, but his heart waited, patient and restless all at once. Don Esteban teased him gently one evening, cane tapping. "You keep that chair too clean, Morales. Who's it for?" Diego only smiled faintly, gaze fixed on the horizon. "For someone who always pays her debts," he murmured. The old man nodded, saying nothing more. Seasons turned, the desert sun unrelenting as ever. Whispers of Elena's parole floated like cautious rumors. Diego didn't allow himself to believe them outright. Hope, he knew, was dangerous as any ambush. Still, he polished her stool every morning. The day would come. He felt it deep, unshakable, not because justice promised it, but because she had. Her debt was never money, never owed in coins. It was owed in truth, sacrifice, and unbroken spirit. One day she would return, and the town would change. The noon bus wheezed to a halt in the center of town. Its brakes hissed, scattering dust into the dry summer air. Diego stood across the street, rag in hand, heart pounding. He'd told himself not to expect this day, not to hope, but hope had lingered anyway, stubborn as the desert sun. Passengers filed out, shoulders hunched against the heat. Then she appeared, Eleanor, thinner, eyes harder, but alive. Her boots hit the pavement with quiet defiance. For a moment time slowed, the noise dimming away. She scanned the crowd until her gaze locked on his. Diego dropped the rag, steps carrying him forward before thought. He stopped short, uncertain, words lodged in his chest. Elena smiled faintly, the same stubborn curve he remembered. "I never finished paying you back," she said softly. Her voice carried both apology and promise in equal measure. They stood there, silence speaking louder than sound. The town bustled around them, oblivious to the weight. Diego finally managed a laugh, rough but real. "You don't owe me anything," he said firmly, "but I'll take whatever you're offering." Elena's hand brushed his, tentative, steady, unflinching. In her eyes, Diego saw scars, strength, and beginnings. No prison bars had broken her, no betrayal had killed her fire. She carried debts of her own, but none for him. What she carried now was choice, and she chose here. Don Esteban watched from his porch, cane tapping once. The old man's smile curved beneath weathered lines. Justice had shaken the town, but this was different. This was healing, born not from law, but from love. The desert, for once, felt less heavy. Inside the garage, the empty stool no longer waited. Elena sat on it, laughing softly as Diego fixed a carburetor. The air smelled of oil, dust, and something like peace. For the first time in years, Diego felt whole. The broken had been mended, not perfectly but enough. Outside the sun climbed mercilessly, sky vast and endless. Trucks rolled past, horns echoing down the highway. Life moved, fragile but unyielding, stitched by small victories. Diego wiped his hands, watching Elena flip through mail. The world was still dangerous, but less lonely now. That night, stars carved fire across the desert sky. Diego and Elena sat on the garage roof, quiet. No debts remained between them, only shared purpose. The future stretched uncertain, but not unbearable. For once, it stretched together.